Yes, here we go. It's 8:40, almost 8:41. We are learning tonight Maseches Eruvin, Daf Pei, a continuation of the sugya that we began last night. One of the things that we were speaking about last night, and the starting point for today, was how do we do the Shituf Muvos? So if you look, just scanning back to Ayin Testament Beis just for a moment, look at the first line at the open of the Gemara in Ayin Testament Beis. There the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yehuda, Chavis shel Shituf Muvos tzarich la'agbiam min hakarka tevach. You have to pick it up one tevach. Good. Now go to Pei Amid Aleph, fourth line. Opens the Gemara, Meisive, hold on 1 second. Kesad mishtatfin b'mavui. This brisa seems to contrast with the line that we just saw from Rav Yehuda. How so? Because the brisa writes as follows: Mivian chavis shel yayin. You can use a barrel that has wine, v'shel shemen, oil, v'shel tamarim, dates, v'shel groger is also a version of dates, v'shel sha'ar minei peros, all kinds of fruits. Imi shelo tzarich lezakos. If they are mine, I have to have you in mind. I have to be mezakeh for you. V'im mishelahen. If it belongs to you, if it belongs to other people, then the din is tzarich lehodia. Then you have to let those people know. You can't be mezakeh everybody else with someone else's food. I can't make a shituf muvos with your food without talking to you first. It's yours. Dvarim pshutim, obviously. And then here's the line that makes things difficult for Rav Yehuda. Says the Gemara, how do you do the shituf muvos? Umagbia min hakarka mashehu. So a tefach is 3-4 inches. A mashu is a mashu. It's just picking up off the ground a little bit. It could be 100 pounds. It could be very heavy. Maybe you'll just kind of put it against your body, just lean a little bit, get an inch off the ground, and you're good. So who's right? Rabbi Yehuda has a brisa against him. Answers the Gemara, my mashu nami tekamer. What does that mean, mashu? That's also tefach. It was being a little loose with its language, but really everyone agrees that it is a tefach, and that's the appropriate amount. Itmar, we are now going to have a machlokes amoraim between Rav and Shmuel about two different topics. Itmar, says the Gemara, shitufei mavuos. Rav Amar ein tzarich lezakos. Rav says you don't have to be mezaket for other people. Shmuel Amar tzarich lezakos. Shmuel says absolutely yes you do. What about Eruvin tchumen? There Rav Amar tzarich lezakos. Shmuel Amar ein tzarich lezakos. The opposite. Now Shmuel is supported. Bishlam al Shmuel. Everything Shmuel said makes sense. Shmuel said tzarich lezakos in the case of shituf muvos. That's our Mishnah. So that's why it says hachatnan. And in regards to the other topic of Eruv Tchumen, where Shmuel said ein tzarich lezakos v'hachalotnan, there's no Mishnah that says that you need to be mezakos. So Shmuel's shita makes sense. Everything he said fits within the Mishnayos, right? Perfect, wonderful. The problem is Rav. Elo the Rav, my taima. What is the reason why Rav held what he held? In particular, we're asking really about one topic, which is why is it that Rav held by Eruv Tchumen that tzarich lezakos? Why by Eruv Tchumen do we need that? Now we were talking about in our Mishnah about Shitufei Muvos, so it's not, you can't learn anything from our Mishnah. But here the Gemara wants to know why, according to Rab, did he say that when it comes to Eruv Tchumen that you have to be mezakeh? And the Gemara answers Tanoihi. There is a discussion in the Taraim about this. Damar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Now this answer to explain the sheet of Rab is very lengthy. It's about 15 lines until we get a little bit less, about 10 lines or so till we get to the answer. But we will see a shita that supports by Eruv Tchumen that you need to be mezakeh on behalf of others, and you can't do it without being mezakeh for others. It won't work. I can't do an Eruv Tchumen for you unless it's intentional. Okay, good. So let's see how this plays out. One third of the way down, Pei Amud Aleph. The daughter-in-law of Rav Oshia, she went to the Beis HaMerchatz. Don't be confused. This is not a mikvah. It is a Beis HaMerchatz, and I can prove it based on the next words. It got dark while she was there. Women don't go to the mikvah during the day. Why? It's coded in halacha this way because of what we call srach bita. Srach bita is a concern that maybe the daughter of a woman who's going to the mikvah, a daughter who's old enough and aware of what's going on, maybe she'll see that her mother's going to the mikvah, and if it's during the day, she may make the mistake of thinking that you can go on day 7, during the day of day 7 of Shevan Akim and go to the mikvah and be tahora and go home and be mashamish mitasa. That's a mamish kares. It's totally us. The Shevan Akim are not over. Maybe it's not kares because it could be because of zava. It could be because of zava, but it's a big problem. It's for sure an isser d'oraisa of some kind. It's potentially. Shevan Akim is a chashash of zava, but we don't know. It's a safek d'oraisa. But l'chora, you're still in nida until you go to the mikvah. So in theory, you could go. I think we would be concerned on a deraisa level. Either way, I know that this woman did not go to a mikveh. It was a beis hamerchatz. It was a bathhouse. The chashchala, and it became Shabbos at that point. So she went Friday afternoon to get ready for Shabbos. We learned the mitzvah that we're out where we should take a warm shower before Shabbos to get ready for Shabbos. So then it got dark. V'irvala chamosa, her mother-in-law, so that's Rav Oshia's wife, she made an eruv on behalf of her daughter-in-law who was at the beis hamerchatz. All right. And he said, she's stuck. She can't utilize the eruv tchum that was made by the mother-in-law. Amar lo Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, Bavloi, you Babylonian, he says to Rav Chia, what are you talking about? Kol kacha tamachmer be'eruvin. You're so strict about the laws of Eruvin. Kach amar Abba. We've learned about this before. Abba is Rab. Kach amar Abba. What did Rab say? Kol sheyesh lach lahakel be'eruvin hakel. You should be as lenient as you can wherever you can with the world of Eruvin. So why are you being strict? She got stuck at the beis hamerchatz. Let her come home based on the eruv that the mother-in-law built. The bayalahu, and then we got to the real kishkas of the sugya here. Why was he strict? The bayalahu. Why was he strict? Mishal chamosa irva. Was the eruv, did it really belong to the mother-in-law? Umishum delo zichsala, and she didn't have her daughter-in-law in mind, and therefore she was not allowed to come home. Parenthetically, that would be a support for Rav, who says that you need to be mizakeh. That was what he argued. O Dilma, or perhaps no, it wasn't because the mother-in-law was not mizakeh on behalf of the daughter-in-law. O Dilma, perhaps mishalayir, but really the eruv did belong to the daughter-in-law who was at the beis hamerchatz. However, mishum de shalomi daita, but she didn't know what was happening. She didn't expect to be there that late. So when the mother-in-law saw what was going on, she took some of her daughter-in-law's food and tried to make an eruv out of it. Is that the reason why it didn't work? Answers the Gemara. Amar lahen hahume rabbanan. There was a rabbi who answered this question. Rabbi Yaakov Shmei. I heard this answer from Rabbi Yochanan. What's the answer? Right in the middle of the page, 2 lines before the wider lines. Mishel chamosa irva. Umishum delo zichsala. Really, it did belong to the mother-in-law. And why is it that Rav Chia said that it didn't work? Because she did not have intention. The mother-in-law was not mizakeh on behalf of the daughter-in-law, and therefore the eruv did not work. Again, a raya to Rav to support Rav's opinion.
Aren't the words the erva chamosa? He made it for her.
Where are you? Yeah.
The erva la chamosa. Your mother-in-law made an eruv for her.
It's interesting because when you read the story that way, it does seem that way, right. But the chakira does not work out that way. It may have been her intention, but maybe her intentions were not.
So what intention does there need to be for it to be zachsala?
Pick it up. I don't know. We have to see what the mechanics are. But the way the story is framed out is that she did not do it the right way. And it's funny because as I was reading it this time to teach it, now I'm like, the language of the story, just what you said was a question that hit my head while I didn't ask it because I don't have an answer. It's a good question, but I'm presuming that there's going to be a very good answer to that. And it's maybe her intentions were great, but she did a poor job. Because as we saw when we started out, how do you do this? How do you do shituf muvos? You have to pick it up. So maybe by Rubi Chatzeros, maybe by Rubi Tchumen, we would have said the same thing. Either way, it was flawed. And now we are 2 lines. The last line before the long lines. Amar le Reb Zera, the Reb Yaakov, Berei Devas Yaakov, Kimatis Hasam. When you get to Eretz Yisrael, he said to Reb Yaakov, please do me a favor, Akif. I want you to go out of your way. Vizil l'Sulma Datzur, and please go to the city, to this location of Sulma Datzur. Ubaya mineme Reb Yaakov Bar Idi. I want you to ask this question to Reb Yaakov Bar Idi. Was it that it really did belong to the mother-in-law, the eruv that she made for eruv tchumen, and she just didn't have her daughter properly in mind? Or was the same question we asked before? Really, did it belong to her, to the daughter-in-law, but it was done without her knowledge? And this is the proof of Rav, why Rav said that you need to be mizakeh. Why you need to be mizakeh. I want to look at your question a little bit more though, Hirsch, because you're correct. I don't know. I have to look at it more. I'm not sure. Question's better than the answer, but I'll look it up. Fourth line of the wider lines. Amar Rav Nachman, how do we paskin in all of these cases? We saw this double machlokes between Rav and Rav Yochanan in the case of Shituf Muvos and in the case of Eruv Tchumen, and how do we paskin? So says Gemara, Rav Nachman Naktinan, we have our tradition, we paskin, Echad Eruv Tchumen, Echad Eruv Chatzeros, Echad Shitufe Mavuos, Tzarech Lezakos. In all cases, one needs to be mezakeh on behalf of another person in order for it to actually work, otherwise it does not. Asks the Gemara, okay, we only left one out. What's the only Eruv that's missing? Eruv Tavshilin, right? That's the one we haven't spoken about yet. That's spoken about in another Masechta at length. Says the Gemara, Boy Rav Nachman, Eruve Tavshilin, Tzarech Lezakos, or Ein Tzarech Lezakos? Well, Rav Nachman, he wanted to know, what is the deal? Do we say that Eruv Tavshilin needs to have a direct zchus for other people, or Ein Tzarech Lezakos, or do you not have to have that in mind? Amar Rav Yosef, Umayti Baile, what kind of question is that? Lo Shmiele Hada Amar Rav Nachman Bar Rav Ada Amar Shmuel Eruv Tavshilin Tzarech Lezakos. Didn't you hear the din that Rav Nachman Bar Ada said in the name of Shmuel that you need to be mezakeh? So he answers the question very simply. No, I never heard it. He says, Amar le Abaye Pshita de lo Shmiele. Obviously, he did not hear it. Now, Abaye was 4th century, and he was speaking about someone in the 2nd century. He's like, Pashut, he didn't hear it, because if he would have heard it, he wouldn't have asked this question. He clearly didn't hear it. So, Amar le Abaye Pshita de lo Shmiele, de Ishmiele, mighty baile. What question would there have been? Beat down the kapslas. Ask me if I've ever heard it. Don't tell me what's wrong with you. I never heard it. Obviously, I didn't hear it. Amar le, maybe you would have thought, to Eruv Tchumen, maybe we could have made an extension from the world of Eruv Tchumen. Milo Amar Shmuel Ein Tzarech Lezakos. Maybe we would have thought by the world of Eruv Tchumen that Shmuel said you don't have to be mezakeh. We don't paskin like him, and therefore maybe here V'amar Ihu Tzarech Lezakos, and maybe here he would have said by Eruv Tavshilin that you need to. Says the Gemara, you can't compare Eruv Tchumen to Eruv Tavshilin. Hachi Hashta, that doesn't work at all. We're about 15 lines from the bottom, 2/3 of the way down. Bishlama Hasam Pligi Rav Shmuel. You're right in the case of Eruv Tchumen, like we saw at the top of this page. We saw that there was already a machlokas Rav and Shmuel. You're right. I can understand that there are two sides of the coin. And we restrict in both cases that we say that you need to be be mezakeh for another person. Aval hacha, but here by Eruvin Chatzeros, he said the Shmiele, had he heard about it, miika demand palik, even had he heard about it, there's no bar plukta. No one was arguing this case, so there's no havamina at all that Eruv Chatzeros should be anything other than Tzarech Lezakos, and that is in fact how it's quoted in Shulchan Aruch. An interesting case that comes up, two of the same cases, Hahu Torzina. There was a Torzina to have a b'shiva vusei de Rabbi Zera, who lived in the city of Rabbi Zera. What is a Torzina? Take a look at Rashi, 10 lines from the bottom of the page. In Rashi says, Nachri, a non-Jewish person, hayamemuna al klei zayin, ha'asuyin l'shmira sa'ir. And his job was to watch over all of the battle gear. L'hilachem al hatzarim v'dar ba'ir. And he was watching over everything, all the guns, all the bows and arrows, to protect people from the city, but v'dar ba'ir. But he lived in the city. So we already see where this is going. Huh? What'd you say? Teddy, right, exactly, Teddy. I don't know if 9mm. Off for a little bit. Sorry about that. The Wi-Fi turned off here in the building. And we're back and still recording. Okay, so says the Gemara, we are about we're about 15 lines from the bottom of the page, and says the Gemara as follows: Ahu Torzina dahava b'shiva vusei de Reb Zera. There was a person who was protecting all of the weaponry at the opening of the city. He lived in the same city. A non-Jewish person lived in the city of Reb Zera. Omar le ogir lan reshusach. Please, can you do me a favor? Can we rent out your house? We have this Jewish thing, whatever. He explains Eruvin Chatzeros. So he wasn't in the mood. Lo ogir lu. He wasn't willing to be ogir. Wasn't willing to rent. Okay. Also the comment of Zera. So then the people in town, they tried to speak to this Torzina, and he wasn't willing. So they went to Reb Zera and said, Amrule, they said to Reb Zera, Ma'u lemegar midebisu. Are we allowed to rent from his wife instead of from him? Meaning, does the actual owner of the house need to know? Can I just talk to his wife instead? So I doubt it was like one of those mortgages of tenants by the entirety of like a joint. Stama, that's not how it worked back in the day. So we're asking a halachic question. Can we use a loophole? She lives there. She has a degree of bilus there, whatever that means. So does that work?
What's the scenario though? It was a town. They live in the same chutzner.
Yeah, it's a Eruvin Chatzeros. It's a Eruvin Chatzeros. So they share a chatzer apparently, or it's either that. It doesn't say if it's. Well, we'll see in a minute what it looks like. But in the end, it will see how we treat her. But I believe under the circumstances, we're talking about Eruvin Chatzeros. Rashi here, when he speaks about the Torzina, he says, and Vidar Ba'ir, he lives in the city. So it could be Shituf Muvos, could be Ruvi Chatzeros, or it could be Ruvi Tchumen. But either way, it has to be something for renting. That's usually by Ruvi Chatzeros. So it's Mistama, that's the case. So then he says, what about renting? Amar Lehu, Hachi Amar Re. Did I skip a line here? Nope. Hachi Amar Reish Lakish Mishmei de Gavra Rabba. Reish Lakish said in the name of a great man, Umanu. Who was this great man? That was Reb Chanina. Ishto shel Adam me'arebes shalomi daito. When the owner himself is not willing, so then what we do is we can say that his wife is sufficient to make the sale, the rental. So instead, they would go to the wife and say, "Can you please let us rent your property? Here's what to do. Coins, transfer hands, done." Okay, next case, identical case, but with less clarity. Hahu Torzina, same person. This person lived in another city. Amre le, they said to him, Oger lan reshusach, can we please rent from you? Lo oger lahu, he wasn't willing to rent. So then the people in town, also the Kamed Rabbi Yehuda bar Oshia, they went to go ask the Rabbi Shaila, Amre le ma'al lemegar midabisu, am I allowed to rent from his wife? And he said, Lo hababiyah, they didn't know the answer. Also the Kamed Rav Masna, they went to go ask Rav Masna, and also Lo hababiyah, he didn't have the answer either. Also the Kamed Rav Yehuda, of course, this is not the same Rabbi Yehuda that they went to before. They went to a different Rabbi Yehuda, and Amar Lahu, and he said to them, Hachi Amar Shmuel, this is what Shmuel says about such a case, Ishto shel Adam me'areves shalomi daito. So then we are allowed to go to the wife of and to do a rental, and that would be sufficient. Meisve says the Gemara, that's not so simple that we are allowed to rely on the wife. We've had two Mari Makomos now that say that that's allowed. But what are we supposed to do? Nashim, 5-6 lines from the bottom. Nashim, she'irvu v'nishtatvu shalomi das be'alehen, and eruv ve'ein shituf shituf. This is very clear. So what are you going to do about that? We have a brisa that says explicitly, not like you, Shmuel. Shmuel, you want to say that you're allowed to be ma'arev using the wife of the Nachri husband? Says the brisa, absolutely not. Answers the Gemara, lo kasha, no problem at all. There are obviously going to be two scenarios. Sometimes we are allowed to lean on the wife of and do that rental to be oger, and sometimes we're not. What's the distinction? Lo kasha, ha de asar, ha de lo asar. It depends how bad of a scenario it is. If this one family is the problem and they ruin it for everyone else, then we're makil. But if there's another option for us, and this family is, they asser us from one mavui, let's say, but I have access to another mavui, then we don't allow the leniency of leaning on the wife. And that's how Rashi explains this very clearly. Rashi, 7 lines from the bottom of the page, if in fact this one family is going to ruin everything for the mavui, then we don't need his knowledge, her knowledge will suffice. Umas nisim b'delo asar, and the case in the brisa that we saw 5 lines from the bottom of the page, the Tosefta that we just learned, that said ein shitufan shituf, so that is kegon chatzer shebein shnei mavuos. I live in a chatzer and I have a mavui on each side. You said no, fine, I'll go out the other way. You're not trapping my whole city. So that's the distinction. Halacha l'maisa, that's what we would do. Is that in a case where a Nachri lives somewhere and he's not willing to rent from us, we can go to his wife if the lack of rental from this one family will ruin the walking for everyone, ruin the caring for everybody, then we can be mekel, otherwise we cannot. So says the Gemara, hachinami mistabra, it has to be this way. A critical Rashi, which really helps to understand the Gemara. 3 lines from the bottom. Hachinami mistabra demo de Shmuel hecha delo asre. We know that Shmuel has to agree that hecha delo asar, that where this one family won't ruin it for you, that you're not allowed. I know that that's true because of the following Gemara. The Gemara says, Din ken kasha de Shmuel. It has to be that this is the case. Otherwise, we would have had a contradiction in Shmuel. Above, we saw Shmuel say that it's mutter to rent from the wife without the husband's knowledge. Here, what does Shmuel say? Amar Shmuel, 3 lines from the bottom. Let's say that you had one person who lives in a mavui. He's a ragil. He's a regular person as it relates to being mishatev, to being a part of the shituf muvos. And v'lo nishtatev, this week he forgets to. They walk right into his house. They can go in and they can just do what they need to do in order to make the eruv work because he's a regular. That's fine. And now the Gemara makes the diuk that supports Shmuel. Ragil in, she'ein ragil lo. And the case of she'ein ragil, when the person is not a regular, This is how the Gemara assumes it's the case of Shelo Asar. It's the case of I have another option other than this person. And that's how Shmuel works out perfectly fine. And maybe this last statement of Shmuel, where we see that you are allowed to force someone, the first part of this line, where you are allowed to force someone who's irregular, lema misayele, maybe this works out according to the brisa that says, kofin oso lasos lechi v'kora lemavui. Maybe in another environment, in another circumstance, we can force someone to make a lechi or koreh in a mavui. As we turn to the top of Pamud Beis, we see that this comparison is rejected. Shiny hasam deleka mechitzos. You can't compare the two cases because case number one is the case that we're talking about where everything is already built. We're just trying to get a kula for carrying. But here in the mavui, you have a totally open wall. The cases are just not comparable. Machlokes Rashi Tosos, how to understand this line. An even bigger machlokes about the next three words in the Gemara. One shita takes out the next words in the Gemara. The Gra keeps them in and says Lishna Harina Bezdin Shiny. Different possibilities to understand the Gemara. For the simplicity, we can just leave that out. But if you're interested in an arichus here, on the side here, there's the Hagos Meharav Ranshberg on the side of the Gemara, gives a whole arichus about the Gra and what he meant and how to understand this Gemara should the words stay in. Either way, let's continue. Second line, Pei Amud Beis. Itmar Rav Chia Bar Ashi Amar Rav Osen Lechi Ashera. You are allowed to make a lechi out of an ashera tree. Rav Shimon ben Lakish Amar, not only that, osin kora ashera. You can even use it for a kora. Man de Amar kore, one who allows the ashera tree to be used for the kore. Kol shekain lechi. Right, the kora is a stronger status than the lechi. You're going to put up a beam on top, that's stronger than the lechi which stands on the side. So if you're going to say that you can use an ashera for a korah, then all the more so you can use it for a lechi. But the opposite is not true. Umad amar lechi, the one who says that you can use an ashera for a lechi only, aval korah lo, you're not allowed to use it for a beam because there, kituse mechtas shiure, there by the korah, we learned earlier in the Masechta that has to be a beam that can hold a levana. It has to be able to hold a levana. It has to hold a certain brick width. But by the lechi, it can only be a mashu. So why here do we not allow the ashera for the korah? Because this is a principle that we were talking about the other day of kitute mechtas shiure, that because an ashera tree has to be burned, you can never use it for something that needs a shear because it's going to be burned. And we look at it for its ending, which is that it's going to be burned. But if the shear is only a mashu by the lechi, then it's considered permissible. That's why the Gemara makes such a distinction. Next Mishnah, pay.
Quick question.
Yeah.
If they don't talk if the wife back to the previous story. If the wife refuses also to be part of it.
If the wife refuses, then you're totally stuck. That's
and
correct.
You can't just. There's no breaking. There's no forcing him.
No, not by there. Not by that. That was allowed in the case of someone who's a ben mavui, who's a regular, and that was a specific case that was allowed.
Right, but because of goy, it's
that would not work.
It's like, hey, we asked him to try and convince.
We tried, and now we're gonna break into your house, right? So then, just to be clear for those of you on Zoom who can't hear, what Mark was asking is that we know that the Torzina, the guy who was actually the guard, said no. So then we said, can we talk to his wife under certain circumstances when he will otherwise ruin the mavui? Yes, you can ask the wife, but if she says no, then you're really stuck. That's just a problem.
Just another observation on that story is that we keep talking about you go to his wife Shlomi Das, but really it's a step further because he's the owner and refused the allowance. It's not just he didn't know, he wasn't home, so they asked the wife, and that would be the case of, can I ask the wife if the husband doesn't know? But if he refused, it's another level of negative that.
So the way to frame it is, if the husband's rejecting it.
Right, it's a huge cool. Because
that was exactly what I was going to say. The way to frame it is.
It's against his will. Huge. Right.
It's against his will. It also assumes that she has bilus.
Right.
Which may not be true. If she's somech al shulchano, she has nothing.
Home, so you could say the husband's okay with his wife making these decisions,
which is itself a shiloh. It's a chiddush too.
But this is a big step.
But it's not terribly surprising when you think about the reason why we have this whole concept of renting in the first place, which is just, we're going to see it at the end of this Mishnah, which is Karesh shelo lishkach as Eruv from the Tinoko. So there's multiple layers of kulas. Where we can be makil, we will. Right. But if she turns you down, then that was Mark's question. Then you're left with zero. You need something. But it is a big kula. It is a very big kula for sure. That's
great.
Maybe I didn't see this, but maybe the Rishonim would have to say that she can't be somech al shulchano. Maybe she has to have her own income, because otherwise she's him. And if he says no, then by definition she says no. I don't know if the Rishonim would make such a chakira. We make it less of a chiddush, a little bit less of a chiddush, but it is a din nevertheless. Correct, for sure. Okay, new Mishnah. Nismai ta'ochel. What happens if, as Shabbos is arriving, the shear of the eruv that you use, the food is now less. So the halacha is mosif umizake. You can add in more food and do it on behalf of the people. Ve'in sarich lehodia. You don't need to let anybody know. The shear of your eruv is a little bit less. You add it, everything's fine. Nitosfu alehen. What if more people came into town? So now you're being mosif umizaket v'tzarich lehodia. Now you need to let people know. Take a look at Rashi to the left, 1 inch up. Rashi dibur hamaschel v'tzarich lehodia l'diyurin sheni tosfu im daitan be'eruv uchegon sheme'arev mishelahen. You're taking items that belong to them and making an eruv out of that. That's why you have to tell them. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to tell them. It was their stuff. Which is okay. Whatever the logistics were, whatever the Maseches was that you had their fruits to make part of the eruv, I don't know, but that's how Rashi defines this case, and continues the Mishnah. Kama hu shiuran. How much is an appropriate shear for an eruv? Bisman shehein merubin. When there are a lot of people, and we'll define that shortly. Mazon shtei sudos lekulam. It has to be 2 meals worth of food. Bisman shein mu'atin, when it's a smaller crowd, then it's kigrogeris l'chol echad ve'echad. Everyone has to have, when you divvy it up, it would have to be a minimum of a grogeris per person. We'll define all of this later. Amar Rabbi Yossi b'medvarim amurim. When would we say all of this to be the case? B'tchilas eruv. That's when we get started. That's when we're making the eruv in the beginning. Aval b'shiyare eruv kolshu. But what's shiyare eruv? So Rashi, just to our left, about a centimeter up, says Shiare Eruv Shenismayit Mishiuro. But what happens if it gets less than Kolshu? Then it's Shabbos already. Most of your Eruv was eaten by animals. You have a little bit left. Everyone can take Shiraim from the Rebbe. You just take a little bit of a bite, and then everyone is Yotze the Eruv. You don't have to eat it. Just there has to be enough for everyone to have access to it. V'lo amru la'arev bechatzeros el kadei shelo lishkach es hatinokos. We've already heard this principle in the name of Rav Meir many blot ago, 10, 15 blot ago, that the whole idea of eruv chatzeros is kadei, so that the children don't forget about Eruvin. Opens the Gemara b'mai askinan. What is the context of our Mishnah when we say, as our Mishnah opens, that nismai ta'ochel? So let's see what's happening here. Ilema b'min echad. If everything is all the same type of food, so then my irya nismait afilu kalanami. Forget about lowering the amount, which was the first word of the Mishnah, lowering the amount. Afilu kalanami. Even if it were to have been totally completed, you wouldn't have to do anything. You'd be fine. Says the Gemara, el b'shnei minin. You want to say it's with 2 types of food? So now you have apples and wine. What good does that do? Afilu nismai nami lo. Even if the amount had gone down and it was 2 types of food, you still wouldn't have to replenish in a meaningful way where you have to start telling everybody. Because what does the Brisa say? Titania, 1/3 of the way down Pamid Bays. Titania, kala ha'ochel mimin echad ein tzarich lehodia. The Brisa writes that if you finished all of the food and it was only 1 type of food, then ein tzarich lehodia. There you don't need to let people know. Mi beis minin. But if it was 2 and all of the food got finished, then tzarich lehodia. What's the inference? That if it wasn't finished but it was nismait, that ain't tzarich lehodia. And that also doesn't work. With our Mishnah. So then, how do we understand our Mishnah? So answers the Gemara. I could explain our Mishnah that we're only talking about 1 type of food as the eruv. The ibayis ema mishnei minin. I could also explain our Mishnah as though we're talking about 2 types of food for the eruv. Ibayis ema mimin echad my nismait. Nismatmate, very close in words, but Rashi defines what nismatmate means just to our left. Dibur hamaschel nismatmate, kala legamre. The word says that it was lessened, a lower amount of food. It didn't mean that. It means that it's gone. That's what the case was talking about. That would explain how our Mishnah would make sense if we said the eruv was made out of 1 min. The din is different when you have totally finished all of your food, and therefore you would have to be modia. You would have to tell everyone about it. Halfway down, we said that if there are guests that are added, then we have a certain set of halachos that apply. And the Mishnah there said that you have to tell people about it. You have to be mazaka on their behalf and let them know. So it says the Gemara, Amar of Shezvi, Amar of Chizda, Zosomeres, Chalukin alav Chaverov al Rabbi Yehuda. That implies that Rabbi Yehuda's friends did not agree with him, namely that there's a machlokes tanaim. How so? Because Ditznan, the Mishnah writes, where is this Mishnah? We learned this Mishnah in Memvav. Ditznan, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Bamedvar Mamurim, Be'eruv Etchumen. All of these dinim that we've been learning since the Mishnah, they only apply by Eruv Tchum. Aval be'eruvei chatzeros, me'arvin bein ledas uvein shelo ledas. All the discussions, do they know about it? Do they not know about it? Says Rabbi Yehuda that only applies by Tchumen, but it does not apply by the world of chatzeros. By the world of chatzeros, we are more lenient where we say bein ledas uvein shelo ledas. So says the Gemara, there must be a machlokas. Says the Gemara, correct, pshita, the chaluken. It's pretty obvious that our Mishnah doesn't stem with Rabbi Yehuda. So there's a machlokas tanaim. No, what's the big deal? Says the Gemara, no, you misunderstood. Of course, there's a machlokas, but ma'u detema. I might have thought that when does Rabbi Yehuda deviate? When does Rabbi Yehuda say what he says? Hani mili b'chatzer shebein shnei mavuos. Maybe the only time that Rabbi Yehuda would have been lenient to say that by an eruv chatzeros, that your ma'arvin bein ladas and bein shelo ladas is a chatzer between two mavuos. However, aval chatzer shel mavui echad emalo. I might have thought that it would not have been the case if there's only one mavui. So answers the Gemara, Kamashma, that's not true. So that's the chiddush why the Gemara was raising that there's a machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and our Mishnah. Last sugya for the night until we get up to the Mishnah, and that's where we will pause for the night. Kama hu shiuro. So we said in our Mishnah, if there's a large crowd, then it's shtei sudos, and if there's a small crowd, then it's kigrogris lekol echad be'echad. Okay, well, who's who? What are the numbers here? Asks the Gemara, Kama hu shiuro v'chulei, Kama hu merubin. What's considered a large crowd? Answers the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mar Shmuel, Shmona Asrei b'nei Adam, 18 people. Maybe this is like the root for chai. Says the Gemara, not really. This is a little bit more mathematical. Shmona Asrei v'sulo is 18. What happens if there's 47 people? So it says no. Ema mishmona Asrei v'elech. It's 18 and up. Umay Shmona Asrei denakat. What's with the 18? Where did you get that from? That sounds almost arbitrary. Answers the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Bereid Rabbi Yehuda L'didi Mifra Shali Minei de Abba. I learned this from Abba. Again, Rav. Kol she'ilu michalko lemazon shtei sudos beinehen. When you break up the meals of shtei sudos, the ein magas grogras the kol echad ve'echad, and you're not able to get enough for all the people. Hein merubin. That is what's considered a large crowd. The sagi, and then it will be sufficient. B'mazon shtei sudos. Ve'ilo, and if you don't lose all of your food in that shear of people, so then ninhu. That's how we define it, is based on what you can do. But the chiddush here is what the last piece of the Gemara, which is ve'agav urche kamash malan the shtei sudos havion shmonas regrogros. When you break up the shtei sudos into pieces, that's how we know that it's 18 people. It wasn't a guess. It's not a gematria. You take 2 sudos, you break it up into 18 pieces. That's a grogeris per person, and that's how the Gemara. That's how our Mishnah broke up the difference between Bisman Shehein Merubin versus Bisman Shehein Muwatin. Let's stop here. Tomorrow night, a blot and a half. Pei Aleph and Pei Beis Amud Aleph, finishing the parak Mir Hashem. And see you on tomorrow night. Okay, good. And then Shabbos. Yeah, see you already. We have to start talking about that.